He pointed his finger in her face in the middle of the airport. He told her she would never be anything. His new girlfriend laughed at the humiliation. But when an $80 million jet arrived to pick that woman up, their smiles froze instantly. Madison Young walked through the automatic doors of JFK International Airport, carrying only a handbag and a discreet carry-on. There was no chauffeur waiting with a sign, no assistant carrying her things. There was no outward sign that this woman, with her calm steps and serene gaze, was one of the most successful people in the country. That was how she liked it. Invisible. At peace. Far from the spotlights that often stifled her. The terminal was crowded that morning. Families saying goodbye. Hurried executives talking on their cell phones. Tourists dragging massive suitcases. Madison walked to a quieter corner near the departure screens and pulled her phone from her pocket. She had 3 messages from her executive assistant, Deborah, all urgent. The meeting in Manhattan had been moved up. The investors wanted to confirm the final details of the project that was going to change the lives of thousands of women across the United States. Madison smiled discreetly as she typed her response. This was her dream coming true. While waiting for her boarding confirmation, Madison looked around, observing the people. She had always done that. She liked to imagine the stories behind each unknown face. The mother holding her toddler's hand, the elderly couple checking their passports together, the college student with a worn backpack and eyes full of expectation. Each carried an entire universe within them, and no one there had any idea who she was. For all intents and purposes, Madison was just another ordinary passenger waiting for her flight. It was then that she heard a loud laugh coming from the main entrance of the terminal. A scandalous laugh, the kind that makes everyone turn their heads to see where it's coming from. Madison looked up from her phone and felt her stomach drop. For a second, she thought she was having a waking nightmare. But no, it was real. Horribly real. Franklin Miller was walking through the lobby as if he owned the entire airport. Impeccable suit, polished shoes, an expensive watch on his wrist. And beside him, clinging to his arm like a trophy, was Victoria Vance. The two were talking loudly, laughing at something that probably wasn't even funny, but which they insisted on turning into a public spectacle. Victoria was carrying 3 designer shopping bags and talking non-stop about a 5-star hotel where they had stayed in Miami. Franklin agreed with everything, wearing that smile of superiority Madison knew so well. A smile that had taken her years to realize was completely fake. Madison looked down at her phone, hoping they would pass by without noticing her. The airport was huge. There were thousands of people there. What were the chances Franklin would look at the exact corner where she was? Unfortunately, the universe had other plans. Franklin stopped walking. His gaze found Madison in the middle of the crowd, like a heat-seeking missile. For a few seconds, he just stood there, processing what he was seeing. Then, a different smile appeared on his face. It wasn't the fake smile from before. It was the smile of a predator that had just found easy prey. "Victoria," he said loud enough for several people around to hear. "Look who's over there, my ex-wife. Remember I told you about her?" Victoria narrowed her eyes at Madison and broke into a mean smile. "Is that the famous Madison? The one you said wasn't even good at ironing your shirts, right?" The two laughed as if they had just heard the best joke in the world. Madison felt her face get hot. But she took a deep breath and kept her composure. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her upset. It wasn't going to happen. Franklin walked toward her with long strides, dragging Victoria along. Some people around were already starting to realize something was happening. His tone of voice was too loud to be a coincidence. He wanted an audience. "Madison," he exclaimed with fake surprise when he got close to her. What an incredible coincidence. It's been so long. Madison looked up calmly. Franklin, wow, you look the same, he said, looking her up and down with ill-disguised contempt. Same simple clothes as always. Same pathetic look. Some things never change, right? Victoria let out a high-pitched giggle. Honey, take it easy. It's not her fault she hasn't evolved in life. Madison gripped her phone, feeling the urge to snap back burning in her throat. But she knew that was exactly what they wanted. A reaction. A spectacle. She wasn't going to give them that gift. I'm fine. Thank you for your concern, Madison replied with a firm voice. If you'll excuse me, I'm waiting for my flight. Flight? Franklin arched his eyebrows mockingly. Where are you going? And with what money? Let me guess. You must have saved up coupons all year to afford an economy ticket, right? Victoria laughed out loud, throwing her head back. Oh, Franklin, stop! You're so cruel! Cruel? I'm just being realistic, babe. You know how she was. No ambition, no talent, no nothing. I supported this woman for years, and look at the result. Still in the same spot. Madison felt every word like a knife slowly entering her chest. Not because it hurt to hear that from Franklin. She had already moved past that. It hurt because other people were listening. Strangers who now looked at her with pity, curiosity, or worse, amusement. A nearby couple whispered, pointing discreetly. A teenager had raised his phone, clearly filming the scene. Franklin, I have nothing to say to you, Madison said, trying to move away. Our story ended a long time ago. It ended because you weren't woman enough to keep me, he retorted, taking a step forward and blocking her path. Look at me now. Look at Victoria. Look at what I've achieved. And look at you. Alone. With no one. Carrying that ridiculous little suitcase as if you were taking a bus to the suburbs. Victoria stepped closer, flaunting a designer bag that probably cost more than a budget car. Honey, I don't mean to be mean, but what little shop is that bag from? I've never seen that brand. Is it one of those knockoffs from a street stall? Both statements were lies. Madison's bag was simple by choice, not lack of options. But they didn't need to know that. No one needed to know that. I feel sorry for you, you know, Franklin continued, now with a tone that mixed cruelty and fake compassion. It must be very hard to wake up every day knowing you wasted the best years of your life with a man who never truly loved you. It must be very hard to see Victoria and me traveling the world on social media while you stay here counting pennies to pay the rent. Madison felt her eyes sting, but not with sadness, with rage. An old anger she had buried deep during years of therapy and personal reconstruction. But she wasn't going to cry. Not in front of him. Not in front of her. Not in front of anyone. Do you still cry over him at night? Victoria asked with a syrupy, poisonous voice. Because I imagine you do. After all, look at the man you lost. Any woman would cry. An airport employee passing by slowed his pace, clearly uncomfortable with the scene, but unsure if he should intervene. More people were stopping to watch now. Madison had become the center of a spectacle she never asked to star in. Are you done? She asked, looking directly into Franklin's eyes. Because I have things to do. Franklin laughed and shook his head. Always like this. Always running away from hard truths. That's why you were never anything in life, Madison. That's why you never will be. He turned to Victoria with an air of victory. Let's go, babe. Our flight to Paris leaves in 2 hours. First class, obviously. Not everyone can afford that. The two walked away laughing, leaving Madison there, standing still, with her heart racing and her hands trembling with a rage she didn't know still existed. Around her, people slowly returned to their routines. Some still looked with curiosity, others with pity. An elderly lady approached and gently touched her arm. Are you okay, dear? Madison forced a smile. I am. Thank you. But inside, a storm was raging. Years of hard work, of rebuilding, of proving to herself that she was capable of anything. And 5 minutes with Franklin were enough to make her feel again like that broken woman who used to cry hidden in the bathroom during their marriage. Then her phone vibrated. A message from Deborah. The jet is ready, waiting for you at Hangar 7. Madison took a deep breath and put the phone in her pocket. Franklin had no idea what was coming. And soon, very soon, he was going to find out that the woman he just humiliated in front of everyone was someone very different from the one he left behind. Madison stood still for a few seconds after Franklin and Victoria walked away. Her heart was still beating fast. Her hands were still shaking. But she took a deep breath and tried to regain her composure. She couldn't let that encounter ruin the most important day of her professional life. The meeting in Manhattan was going to happen regardless. The investors were waiting. Thousands of women depended on that project. Franklin Miller had no more power over her. At least that's what Madison kept repeating mentally while trying to believe it. She began walking toward the corridor leading to the exclusive boarding areas. She needed to find the hangar where Deborah was waiting. She needed to get out of that crowded lobby where people were still casting curious glances in her direction. She needed to breathe fresh air and remember who she had become in recent years. But the universe, apparently, wasn't finished testing her that morning. Madison was almost at the corridor when she heard that voice again that made her stomach churn. Franklin had stopped at a convenience store to buy a magazine, and when he came out, he ran right into Madison, passing in front of him. Fate, or perhaps bad luck, had put them in the same path once more. "Look who's here again," Franklin exclaimed loudly, drawing everyone's attention. "Victoria, come here. The poor thing hasn't managed to board yet." Victoria came running with a mean smile on her face, balancing her shopping bags in her arms. "Is she lost? Do you need help finding the budget airline counter, honey?" Madison grit her teeth and kept walking, pretending not to hear. But Franklin wasn't going to let it go. He sped up his pace and stepped in front of her, blocking the way once again. This time, his face was different. There was a calculated cruelty in his eyes, as if he had decided the previous humiliation hadn't been enough. "Hey, I'm talking to you," he said loudly. "How rude! You're not even good enough to greet your ex-husband properly." A small crowd began to form around them. People stopped to see what was happening. A man in a suit shook his head in disapproval, but did nothing. A mother pulled her young son away, muttering something about classless people. But most just watched, as if this were a live reality show. "Franklin, please," Madison said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't want trouble. I just want to leave." "Leave to where?" he asked mockingly. "To that tiny little apartment you rent? To that mediocre job you must have? Because let's face it, Madison, you never had the capacity for anything big in life." Victoria approached and stood beside Franklin, crossing her arms with an air of superiority. "Honey, leave her. It's not worth wasting energy on people like that. Some people were born to be extras in other people's lives." "You're right," Franklin agreed. "But it just makes me sad, you know? Seeing someone who had the chance to be by my side and wasted it all. Look at you, Madison. Look closely. Simple clothes, no brand bag, styled hair. You turned into exactly what I always said you were, a worthless woman." The word worthless echoed in the lobby. Some people in the crowd let out gasps of surprise. An elderly lady shook her head in disapproval. A young man raised his phone and began filming openly, not even trying to hide it. Madison felt the blood rush to her face. The anger she had buried for years was beginning to bubble dangerously. But she knew that exploding was exactly what Franklin wanted. He had always been like that. He provoked, he poked, He humiliated until he got a reaction. And when the reaction came, he played the victim. That was his game. Madison knew those rules all too well. "You don't know me anymore, Franklin," she said with a controlled voice. "A lot has changed." Franklin laughed out loud, throwing his head back. "Changed? What? Did you finally learn how to cook? Did you get a boyfriend who earns minimum wage and takes you out for cheap pizza? Is that your big evolution?" Victoria laughed along, clapping her hands, as if it were the funniest thing in the world. "Oh, honey, stop. You're going to make her cry. Maybe it's good if she cries," Franklin said, stepping even closer to Madison. "Maybe that way, she finally accepts reality. You were never anything, Madison. You're never going to be anything. I carried you for years, and you didn't even realize it. Now look where you are. Alone in an airport, probably going to visit some relative in the middle of nowhere because you don't have money for a real trip." He pointed his finger directly in her face. The same finger he had pointed so many times during their marriage, in arguments that always ended with Madison feeling small, incapable, insufficient. That finger represented everything she had fought to leave behind. "Do you know what your problem is?" Franklin continued, his finger still pointed. "You always dreamed too high for who you are. Remember that ridiculous idea you had? Creating an app? A company? You, Madison, who barely knew how to use a computer? I laughed so hard when you told me that. And I was right to laugh, because look where you are now." "That's absurd!" a female voice shouted from the crowd. "Someone call security!" Franklin looked toward the voice with disdain. "Security for what? I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just having a civilized conversation with my ex-wife. Isn't that right, Madison?" Madison didn't answer. She was using all her energy not to let the tears fall. Not out of sadness, out of rage. A rage so big it burned inside like fire. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell them everything. She wanted to see Franklin's face when he discovered the truth. But something inside told her to wait. The right time would come. An airport employee finally approached. A young man with the look of someone who didn't get paid enough to deal with this kind of situation. "Excuse me, is everything okay here?" "It's great," Franklin replied with a fake smile. "Just catching up with my ex. We're just leaving." He turned to Victoria and gestured for them to go. But before leaving, he looked one last time at Madison, with that smile of superiority she hated so much. "It was good to see you, Madison. Truly. Because every time I see you, I'm sure I made the right choice. Victoria is everything you never were and never will be. Beautiful, interesting, ambitious, a real woman." And with that, they walked away for the second time, leaving Madison there, surrounded by curious glances and ill-disguised whispers. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to control her breathing. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel the pulses in her temples. Years of therapy, years of reconstruction, years proving to herself she was capable. And a single encounter with Franklin was enough to make it all seem to crumble. It was then that Madison felt a presence beside her. A woman had approached silently. She wore an elegant uniform with a gold badge, indicating she worked in an exclusive area of the airport. She had a kind smile and eyes that transmitted a comforting calm. "Ms. Young?" the woman asked in a low voice, almost a whisper. Madison opened her eyes, surprised. "Yes, that's me." The employee leaned in discreetly and whispered words in Madison's ear that completely changed the course of that morning. "The jet is ready, and the crew is waiting. If you could follow me, I'll take you through a private path. I apologize for the delay in finding you." Madison felt her heart skip a beat. Not out of anxiety this time. Out of relief. Out of something resembling poetic justice. "Of course," she replied. "Let's go." The employee smiled and made an elegant gesture indicating the way. "Right this way, Ms. Young. We have a cart waiting to take you directly to the hangar." As Madison began to follow the employee, she noticed that Franklin and Victoria were still visible in the distance, entering a designer store. They had no idea what was about to happen. They had no clue who the woman they just humiliated in front of dozens of people really was. And for some reason, Madison didn't feel angry anymore. She felt something different, something that felt a lot like peace. Because she knew that in a few minutes, without needing to say a single word, the truth was going to reveal itself. And when that happened, Franklin Miller was going to understand that the woman he called worthless was worth more than he could ever dream. As the electric cart glided through the exclusive corridors of the airport, Madison closed her eyes for a moment and let her mind travel back in time. Franklin's humiliation still echoed in her head, but now, mixed with memories she had tried to bury for years. Memories of a time when she believed that man was the love of her life. Madison met Franklin at a mutual friend's graduation party. She had just graduated with a degree in business administration and was full of dreams. She wanted to be an entrepreneur, create something of her own, leave her mark on the world. Franklin was a newly graduated lawyer, handsome, eloquent, with that charm that made any woman feel special. When he approached her that night and said he had never seen such a beautiful smile, Madison felt her heart race in a way she had never experienced before. The first few months were magical. Franklin was attentive, affectionate. He appeared with flowers for no reason, sent messages saying he was thinking about her. He listened to Madison's dreams with attention, agreed with everything, said she was brilliant, and that together they were going to conquer the world. When he proposed to her at a candlelit dinner, Madison cried with happiness. She thought she had found her partner for life. The wedding took place in a beautiful ceremony, surrounded by friends and family. Madison's mother, Mrs. Clare, cried the whole time with emotion. Her father, Mr. Anthony, gave his daughter away at the altar with a pride that overflowed from his eyes. Everything seemed perfect. Everything seemed like a fairy tale about to come true. But fairy tales don't exist in real life, and Madison learned that the hard way. The change in Franklin was gradual, so subtle that Madison took time to notice. First came the small comments. She would prepare dinner, and he would say his mother did it better. She would get ready to go out, and he would ask if she didn't have a less flashy outfit. She would talk about a business idea, and he would let out a condescending giggle, saying she was cute for dreaming so high. Over time, the comments got heavier. Franklin began to question Madison's intelligence in front of friends. He said she didn't understand economics, didn't understand politics, didn't understand anything beyond household things. And even then, he criticized how she took care of the house, too. Nothing was good. Nothing was enough. Madison began to feel small, incapable, a fraud who had tricked everyone into thinking she was competent. Madison's best friend at that time was a woman named Victoria. The two met at a gym and quickly became inseparable. Victoria was fun, always in a good mood, and had the gift of making Madison laugh even on the worst days. When Madison began to vent about the problems in her marriage, Victoria listened carefully and offered advice. She said Franklin was difficult, but that all marriages had ups and downs. She told Madison to be patient. What Madison didn't know was that Victoria had met Franklin long before those gym conversations. What Madison didn't know was that the advice for patience had a cruel purpose behind it. What Madison didn't know was that her best friend had been having an affair with her husband for months. The discovery happened in the most devastating way possible. Madison had left work early because she was feeling sick. When she got home, she heard noises coming from the bedroom, noises that didn't make sense, noises that made her heart freeze in her chest. She climbed the stairs in silence, each step weighing like lead. The bedroom door was ajar, and what Madison saw on the other side destroyed in seconds everything she believed about love, friendship, and trust. Franklin and Victoria were together in the bed Madison shared with her husband, on the same linens she had washed 2 days before. The two were laughing at something, completely at ease, as if that were their place, as if Madison didn't exist. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't make a scene. She simply stood at the door, feeling the world collapse around her like a house of cards. It was Franklin who saw her first, and his reaction was the worst part of it all. He didn't apologize. He didn't show regret. He didn't try to explain. He just looked at Madison with that same air of superiority she knew so well and said, "You didn't expect me to be faithful forever, did you? Look at you. Look at her." It was obvious this was going to happen. Victoria didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. She just gave a small smile, almost out of pity, and said, "Sorry, friend, but you were never woman enough for him." That phrase remained etched in Madison's soul like a branding iron. Never woman enough. Was that what she was? Was that how people saw her? The divorce was fast and brutal. Franklin had the best lawyers, knew all the judges, and knew exactly how to manipulate the system in his favor. Madison was left with almost nothing. The house was sold, and the money was divided, such that she could barely rent a small apartment on the outskirts. Common friends chose Franklin's side because he was influential, powerful, and no one wanted to be on the wrong side of a successful lawyer. Madison found herself alone, completely alone, without a house, without money, without friends, without self-esteem. The only person who stayed by her side was Beatrice, a co-worker who barely knew her, but had the compassion to offer her couch when Madison had nowhere else to go. It was on Beatrice's couch that Madison spent the worst weeks of her life. She cried every night, could barely eat, and had no strength to get up. Franklin's voice echoed constantly in her head, repeating all the humiliations, all the criticisms, all the times he said she wasn't capable of anything. On one of those sleepless nights, Madison found an old notebook in her bag. It was the notebook where she used to jot down her business ideas years ago, before Franklin convinced her to give up on everything. She opened to the first pages and reread what she had written. An idea for an app to connect female entrepreneurs, a platform to share knowledge, find mentors, get investment, something that could help other women realize their dreams. Franklin had laughed at that idea. He had said it was nonsense, that Madison didn't have the technical capacity to create anything, that she should be content being a wife and stop dreaming of impossible things. But that night, alone on Beatrice's couch, with a broken heart and her self-esteem in tatters, Madison made a decision. If Franklin thought she wasn't capable, she was going to prove him wrong. If Victoria thought she was never woman enough, she was going to show exactly what kind of woman she could become. The next day, Madison got up from the couch and started studying. She learned programming through the internet, watching free videos at dawn while working during the day to pay the bills. She learned about business, about investments, about digital marketing. Each new skill was a victory against Franklin's voice in her head. Beatrice noticed the change and began to encourage Madison. She lent money when needed. She listened to her plans without judging. She believed in her when no one else did. The following months were the hardest of Madison's life. There were days when she almost gave up. There were nights when the pain in her heart was almost unbearable. But every time she thought about quitting, she remembered Franklin's finger pointed in her face. She remembered Victoria's smile. She remembered all the times they said she wasn't enough, and she kept going. The electric cart stopped gently, bringing Madison back to the present. The employee touched her arm gently. "Ms. Young, we've arrived." Madison opened her eyes and saw the double doors leading to the private hangar in front of her. On the other side of those doors was the result of years of work, of tears, of sleepless nights, of never giving up even when everything seemed impossible. She took a deep breath and smiled. Franklin thought she would never be anything. Victoria thought she would never be anything. They were about to discover the magnitude of the mistake they made. The hangar doors were still closed in front of Madison, but her mind continued to travel through the past. Before entering that world of jets and billion-dollar meetings, she needed to remember every step that brought her here, every stumble, every fall, every time she got up. She remembered the first small office she rented, a tiny space in the back of a house. The space barely fit a single bed and a small table that served as an office, kitchen, and dining room all at once. The bathroom was shared with the owners, an elderly couple who looked at her with a mix of pity and curiosity. But it was a roof. It was a start. During the day, Madison worked as an attendant in a department store. The salary was low, and the customers were often rude. But she swallowed every frustration and saved every penny left over. At night, when she got home exhausted, she opened the old computer Beatrice had lent her and studied until her eyes burned with fatigue. Programming was the hardest part. Madison had never written a line of code in her life. Franklin always said she didn't have a head for technology, that was something for smarter people, including her. The first few months were pure frustration. The code didn't work. The app crashed. The tutorials seemed written in another language. There was one night when Madison spent 3 hours trying to solve an error appearing on the screen, only to discover it was just a misplaced comma. She cried with rage, with fatigue, with the urge to quit. But the next day, she went back to studying. Beatrice became a huge help. She was a counselor, an encourager, and sometimes the only person preventing Madison from sinking into the darkness. When Madison said she wasn't going to make it, Beatrice replied firmly, "You've already managed to survive the worst. The rest is just details." And somehow those simple words gave her the strength to continue. After almost a year of solitary work, Madison finally had something to show. An app still full of bugs, but functional. The idea was simple and powerful. A platform where female entrepreneurs could connect, exchange experiences, find mentors, and even get investment for their businesses. A safe space to dream big without being ridiculed. The problem was that no one wanted to invest in an unknown woman, without experience, with an app made on a borrowed computer. Madison knocked on dozens of doors. She sent hundreds of emails, participated in entrepreneurship fairs, where she was ignored by investors who preferred to talk to men in suits. The answer was always the same: interesting, but not for us. The hardest moment came on a rainy Thursday, when Madison received the last rejection from a list of 15 investors she had contacted. The email was short and cold. "We don't see commercial potential in your proposal. Good luck in your future projects." She read those words sitting on the floor of the rented room, with the rain hitting the window and tears streaming down her face. That night, Madison almost gave up for real. She took the notebook where she had written the original idea and thought about throwing it in the trash. Why continue? She wasn't capable. She would never be anyone. It was better to accept reality and stop deluding herself. It was then that the phone rang. It was Beatrice. "Did you see the email I sent you?" Madison hadn't seen it. She opened her inbox with trembling hands and found a forwarded message. It was from a man named Robert Miller, founder of a venture capital fund focused on technology. He had seen Madison's presentation at one of the fairs she attended and wanted to schedule a meeting. "I found your project interesting," the email said. "I'd like to talk about investment possibilities. When are you available?" Madison read those words 3 times to make sure she wasn't dreaming. Then she called Beatrice, and the two cried together on the phone for 10 minutes. The meeting with Robert Miller happened on a sunny Tuesday that Madison never forgot. She was nervous, her hands sweating and her voice trembling, but she presented her project with all the passion she felt. She spoke about women who had dreams but no support. She spoke about how much she herself had been diminished by people who should have been partners. She spoke about the importance of creating spaces where talent mattered more than appearance or connections. Robert listened in silence. When Madison finished, he stayed quiet for a few seconds, just looking at her. Then he said 5 words that changed everything. "I believe in you, Madison." The first investment was modest, but enough for Madison to quit her job at the store and dedicate herself entirely to the app. She hired a developer named Carla to help with the technical part, and the two worked for months to improve every detail of the platform. The launch happened without a party, without grand marketing. Just a post on social media and a lot of hope. In the first week, the app had 200 downloads. Madison was thrilled. In the second week, there were 1,000. In the first month, 10,000. Women were finding each other, forming support networks, creating businesses together. The dream Franklin called nonsense was becoming a reality. The growth after that was explosive. A business magazine did a story on the platform. A famous influencer recommended the app to her followers. Investors who had previously ignored Madison were now calling, begging to participate in the next investment rounds. In a few years, that project, made in a rented room, transformed into one of the largest technology companies for women in the country. But Madison made a choice that few understood. She refused to appear. No television interviews, no magazine covers with her face, no social media flaunting success. She wanted the focus to always be on the women the platform helped, not herself. The press knew there was a mysterious founder behind the empire, but few knew her face or her story. Deborah was hired as a personal assistant when the company began to grow exponentially. It was she who took care of Madison's schedule, meetings with investors, business trips. It was she who ensured Madison could remain invisible while commanding a multi-billion-dollar empire from behind the scenes. Beatrice became the company's chief operating officer. It was the first official hire Madison made, even before she had money to pay a decent salary. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself," Madison said on the day of the hiring. "Now let's build this together." Robert Miller continued as an investor and advisor, always repeating to anyone who would listen that Madison was the most determined entrepreneur he had ever met. "She transforms rejection into fuel," he used to say. "The more they say she can't, the more she proves she can." And Franklin? Franklin had no idea about any of this. To him, Madison was still that worthless woman he had discarded years ago. Victoria and he continued their life of flaunting on social media, traveling to expensive places, showing off a manufactured happiness to their followers. Neither of them ever bothered to find out what had happened to Madison. She had simply ceased to exist. Until that morning at the airport. The employee touched Madison's arm again, bringing her completely back to the present. "Ms. Young, is everything okay? The crew is waiting." Madison smiled and nodded. "Everything is perfect. Let's go!" The double doors opened, and the light from the hangar appeared, with the discreet logo of Madison's company on the side. The uniformed crew waited in line, smiling with genuine respect. The captain approached and extended his hand. "Welcome, Ms. Young. Everything is ready for takeoff." Madison shook his hand, feeling an emotion that was hard to describe. It wasn't pride that what Franklin called worthless had built something he would never even be able to imagine. And somewhere in that airport, completely oblivious to the truth, Franklin Miller continued believing he had won. He had no idea what he was about to discover. The private hangar was a world completely different from the chaotic lobby where Madison was the only one reflected under the soft ceiling lights. The silence was broken only by the distant sound of engines being warmed up. And in the center of it all, majestic as an eagle about to take flight, was the executive jet that represented everything Madison had achieved. The aircraft was impressive. Elegant lines, pearlescent paint that shone even in the artificial light. And on the side, discreet but unmistakable, the logo of the company Madison had built from scratch. The cabin crew waited in position, impeccable uniforms, genuine smiles of those who knew exactly who was about to board. The captain, a man with graying hair and a military bearing named Captain Moreno, approached with firm steps and extended his hand to Madison. "Ms. Young, it's always an honor. The flight plan to Chicago is confirmed. Estimated time 45 minutes. Madison shook his hand with a smile. "Thank you, Captain. How is the family?" "Very well, ma'am. My daughter asked about you. She said the app helped her find a mentor for her bakery business. How wonderful. Send her my best." This was the kind of conversation Madison insisted on having. Knowing people by name, knowing their stories, remembering that behind every employee existed an entire life happening. Franklin never understood that. To him, employees were invisible. Tools that existed only to serve him. Deborah appeared at the top of the jet stairs, tablet in hand, with that expression of someone who already had 1,000 tasks organized for the next few hours. "Madison, the investors confirmed their presence for 2 p.m. The foundation documentation is ready for signature, and Beatrice sent word to say the surprise is prepared." "What surprise?" Deborah smiled mysteriously. "You'll find out when we arrive." Madison shook her head, used to the well-intentioned secrets of the team. She began to climb the jet stairs, feeling the texture of the polished handrail under her fingers. Each step was a silent reminder of the distance she had traveled since that small rented room in the back of a family house. It was then that it happened. A shrill voice cut through the air of the hangar, coming from somewhere behind the security barriers. A voice Madison knew all too well. "It can't be. Franklin, look, it's her." Madison turned slowly, her heart accelerating. On the other side of a panoramic glass wall that separated the hangar from the passenger transit corridor were Franklin and Victoria. The two had stopped midway, clearly on their way to the boarding gate for the flight to Paris, and now they were looking into the hangar with expressions of absolute incredulity. Franklin's mouth was literally open. The magazine was gripped so hard his knuckles were white, his eyes wide, fixed on Madison, on the jet, on the uniformed crew, on everything that made absolutely no sense in his head. Is that a private jet?" Victoria stammered. "Franklin, what is going on?" Franklin didn't answer. He couldn't. His brain was trying to process information that simply didn't fit the reality of the worthless woman. The pathetic woman who didn't know how to do anything. The ex-wife he had publicly humiliated not even an hour ago. That same woman was standing on the stairs of an executive jet, being treated like royalty by an entire crew. "It must be a mistake," he murmured more to himself than to Victoria. "She must be working there, a cleaner or something." But deep down, Franklin knew. The way the captain had greeted Madison, the way the woman with the tablet spoke to her, the way she climbed those stairs with the naturalness of someone who did it every day. None of that was the posture of an employee. An elegant man, walking through the same corridor, stopped beside Franklin, noticing the strange scene. It was Gregory Richards, a well-known businessman in the New York luxury and business circuit. He looked at the hangar, saw Madison, and a smile of recognition appeared on his face. "Do you know Madison Young?" Gregory asked casually, without noticing the tension in the air. Franklin turned to him, his face pale. "Madison Young, the founder of Women Connect," Gregory explained, as if it were obvious. one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the country. They say her company is worth more than $2 billion. Incredible, right? And she insists on keeping a low profile. Almost no one knows her face. Victoria let out a strangled sound, something between a gasp and a moan. $2 billion? At least that's what the business journals estimate, Gregory continued, completely oblivious to the earthquake he was causing. I tried to get a meeting with her 3 times. Never managed. She's very selective. He looked at the hangar and sighed. That jet is beautiful, isn't it? They say it cost over $80 million. But for someone worth billions, it's pocket change. Franklin felt his legs weaken. He had to lean against the glass wall so as not to fall. The worthless woman. The pathetic woman. The failure he had abandoned without a shred of remorse. This woman was worth more than $2 billion. This woman had one of the most successful jets in the country, and he had just humiliated her in the middle of a crowded airport. Victoria was in a state of shock. Her mouth opened and closed without producing sounds, like a fish out of water. All the jokes she had made, all the mean comments, all the cruel laughs, all of that now echoed in her head like a sentence of eternal regret. I need to talk to her, Franklin said suddenly, looking for the way into the hangar. I need to explain. Explain what? Victoria interrupted with a shrill voice. That you're an idiot? That you left a woman worth billions to stay with me? The truth of that phrase hit Franklin like a punch to the stomach. He looked at Victoria, and for the first time, he saw something different in her eyes. It wasn't admiration or desire anymore. It was calculation. It was Victoria's mind processing that she had bet on the wrong horse. Sir, this area is restricted. A security guard approached when Franklin tried to open a side door. Authorized personnel only. You don't understand. I know that woman. She's my ex-wife. The guard looked at Franklin with an expression that mixed skepticism and amusement. Sir, Ms. Young does not receive unscheduled visits. If you have a professional matter, Sir, please don't force me to call for backup. Franklin retreated, humiliated in a way he had never experienced before. He was always the one who barred others. He was always the one who decided who deserved attention and who should be ignored. And now he was there on the outside, being prevented from approaching the woman he swore was worth nothing. On the other side of the glass, Madison had stopped at the top and looked one last time. She looked directly at where Franklin and Victoria were. For a moment that seemed to last an eternity. Her eyes met his through the glass. Franklin expected to see anger. He expected to see resentment. He expected to see some kind of vengeful satisfaction in her gaze. But there was none of that. What he saw was much worse. Madison looked at him with absolute calm, a peace that came directly from having overcome the past. There was no hatred in that gaze. There was no contempt. There was only indifference. The indifference of someone looking at a person who means absolutely nothing anymore. And then Madison did something that destroyed Franklin more than any words could. She simply gave a small wave, a polite wave, as if he were a distant acquaintance she barely remembered, and stepped into the jet without looking back. The doors closed. The engines increased their RPM, and in a few minutes, the jet began to taxi toward the takeoff runway. Franklin stood there looking through the glass, watching the $80 million jet take away the woman he had called worthless, the woman he had abandoned, the woman who had become everything he always wanted to be. And Franklin realized Victoria was no longer by his side. She had left without a word, and for the first time in his life, Franklin Miller understood what it was to feel truly alone. Franklin Miller stood in the same spot for several minutes after the jet disappeared over the horizon. His legs wouldn't obey. His brain wouldn't process. All he could do was look at that empty sky where, seconds later, $80 million had taken away the woman he had called worthless. 2 billion. The phrase echoed in his head like a broken bell. Madison was worth $2 billion. The same Madison he humiliated in front of dozens of people. The same Madison he abandoned, thinking he was doing himself a favor. The same Madison he swore would never be anything in life. When he finally managed to move, he realized Victoria had disappeared without a trace. He looked around, searching for that blonde head among the crowd, but found nothing. He took his phone with shaking hands and dialed her number. Voicemail. Tried again. Voicemail. On the third attempt, an automated message informed him that the number had blocked his calls. Franklin felt his stomach sink. Victoria couldn't have done this. Not after everything. Not after 3 years together. Not after all the trips, all the presents, all the promises of a bright future. She couldn't simply have gone away like that. With his fingers still trembling, he opened Victoria's Instagram. What he saw made his blood run cold. The latest post was from 5 minutes ago. A photo of her at the airport, smiling at the camera as if nothing had happened, with a caption that destroyed Franklin completely. New chapter of my life starting now. Sometimes you need to recognize when you bet on the wrong horse and have the courage to change direction. Alone and ready for whatever comes. New beginning. Strong woman. Fresh start. The comments were already pouring in. Her friends sending support. Heart emojis. Curious questions about what had happened. And Victoria responding with hints that clearly referred to Franklin, without mentioning his name. But that wasn't the worst of it. What? While Franklin was still trying to process Victoria's betrayal, his phone began to vibrate non-stop. WhatsApp notifications, messages from co-workers, missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize. Something was happening. Something big. And he had no idea what it was. It was then that a young man about 20 years old passed him, looked at his face, looked at his phone, and looked back at his face with an expression of shocked recognition. "Man, are you the crazy guy from the video?" the kid exclaimed loud enough for several people around to hear. "The one who humiliated the billionaire?" Franklin felt the world spin. What video? It's blowing up on X, Twitter. It already has over 200,000 views. The boy showed his phone screen to Franklin, and there, in high definition, was Franklin himself, pointing his finger in Madison's face, screaming that she was never anything, laughing along with Victoria while humiliating her publicly. Every word, every gesture, every expression of contempt was recorded for the whole world to see. The title of the video was devastating. Arrogant lawyer humiliates ex-wife at airport without knowing she's a billionaire. Watch until the end. Franklin grabbed the kid's phone and started reading the comments. Each was worse than the last. What a disgusting man. I hope his career is over. His face when he found out who she was must have been priceless. Does anyone know this lawyer's name? I want to know, so I never hire him. Justice. He deserves to be publicly humiliated too. Her best revenge was success. Queen. Franklin returned the phone to the kid and started walking aimlessly. People in the lobby were starting to look at him differently. Some pointed discreetly. Others took photos without even trying to hide it. The man who minutes before thought he was king of the world was now the villain of a viral video spreading through the internet like wildfire. His phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from the partner at the law firm. "Franklin, we need to talk urgently. Call me as soon as you can." Another message, this time from an important client. "Saw the video. I'm reconsidering our professional partnership." And one more from another client. "Dr. Miller, I think it's better we look for another lawyer for our case. I don't want my company associated with this type of behavior." Franklin felt his legs weaken. He looked for an empty bench and sat down heavily, head in his hands. In less than an hour, his life had completely collapsed. The girlfriend was gone. His reputation was being destroyed on social media. Clients were abandoning the firm, and all because of 10 minutes of arrogance in an airport lobby. The phone rang. It was his partner, Maurice Campbell, calling directly. Franklin answered with a weak voice. Maurice. Franklin, what the hell is this video story? Have you lost your mind? It was a misunderstanding. I didn't know who she was. Didn't know. And that justifies treating anyone that way? Franklin, do you know how many clients have already called in the last 2 hours? How many? 7. 7 clients wanting to terminate their contracts. And that's just the beginning. The video is everywhere. Journalists are calling the office asking for a statement. Franklin closed his eyes, feeling the weight of every word. Look, Maurice continued with a grave voice. I'm going to be straight with you. I think it's better you take a vacation. A long one. Stay away from the office until this dust settles, if it ever settles. Are you pushing me out? I'm giving you a chance not to sink the whole boat along with you. Think about it. The call ended without a goodbye. Franklin sat looking at his phone screen, watching the notifications continue to arrive. Each was another brick being removed from the building he had taken years to erect. Career, reputation, relationship. Everything crumbling at the same time. An elderly lady passed him and stopped. Franklin looked up, expecting more judgment, more pointed fingers. But the woman just looked at him with something resembling pity. Young man, she said softly. I saw what happened there in the lobby. Saw it all from the beginning. Franklin didn't answer. He didn't have the strength. Do you know what my grandmother always used to say? The woman continued. She said we reap what we sow. Sometimes it takes time, but we always reap. She walked away, leaving Franklin alone with the weight of that simple truth. He finally got up and walked to the airline counter. The ticket to Paris. At least he still had that. At least he could leave the country. Stay away for a few weeks. Wait for the storm to pass. Good afternoon, he said to the attendant. I have a reservation for the 3 p.m. flight to Paris. Franklin Miller. The attendant typed his name into the system and frowned. Sir, your reservation was canceled approximately 40 minutes ago. Canceled? By whom? By Ms. Victoria Vance. She was the holder of the credit card used for the purchase. Franklin felt the ground drop. Victoria had paid for the tickets. Victoria had access to his cards. Victoria always took care of the couple's finances because he thought that kind of thing was minor work. Can I buy another ticket now? He said, pulling his wallet from his pocket. Any class, any time. He swiped his credit card. Rejected. Tried another. Rejected. Tried his debit card. Insufficient balance. Franklin looked at the screen of the nearest ATM and saw the naked truth. Victoria hadn't just left. She had taken everything she could take with her. Years of savings. Investments. The money he thought was safe. The same woman he exhibited as a trophy. The same one he used to humiliate Madison. She had done to him exactly what he had done to his ex-wife in the divorce. Franklin left the airport staggering, not knowing where to go. The luxury apartment he shared with Victoria was in her name. The imported car was in her name. Everything he thought he owned, in reality, had never been his. Outside the terminal, the afternoon was sunny, beautiful, full of people living their normal lives. But for Franklin, the sun seemed to mock him. Each ray of light was a reminder that he was completely alone, completely ruined, completely destroyed. And somewhere in the sky, at 40,000 feet, Madison Young was flying toward a brilliant future without any idea that poetic justice had already done its job. Franklin Miller, the man who swore his ex-wife would never be anything, now had absolutely nothing. And the irony of that truth was crueler than any revenge Madison could have planned. The jet landed smoothly at Newark Airport at 1:42 p.m. Madison looked through the window and saw the executive car already waiting on the tarmac exactly as Deborah had organized. Everything was perfectly timed for the most important meeting of her life. During the flight, Madison had tried to concentrate on the foundation documents, but her mind insisted on wandering back to the encounter at the airport, not out of regret or anger. Those emotions were no longer part of her repertoire when it came to Franklin. What she felt was something like gratitude. Strange, almost inexplicable gratitude, but genuine, because it was Franklin who broke her. But it was in the broken pieces that she found the strength to rebuild herself in a way she would never have imagined. "Ms. Young, we've arrived," Captain Moreno announced through the internal PA system. It was a pleasure, as always. Madison thanked the crew and descended the jet stairs with her heart beating stronger than usual. In a few minutes, she would be at the company headquarters signing the documents that would officialize the creation of the New Start Foundation, a project dedicated to helping women who, like her one day, had lost everything and needed a chance to rebuild their lives. The drive to the office was fast. Manhattan teemed outside the car windows. Millions of people living their own battles, carrying their own scars. Madison thought about how many of those women were at that exact moment going through what she went through, alone, scared, thinking they weren't capable of anything. The New Start Foundation existed to tell each one of them that they were wrong. When the car stopped in front of the mirrored building that housed the headquarters of Women Connect, Deborah was already waiting on the sidewalk. But there was something different on her face, a contained, almost mischievous smile that Madison knew well. "What are you up to?" Madison asked as she got out of the car. "Me? Nothing. But Beatrice might be up to something. The famous surprise. You'll find out in approximately 3 minutes. Madison shook her head and entered the building. The lobby was different. There were flowers everywhere, beautiful arrangements that perfumed the entire environment. Employees smiled in a knowing way, as if they all knew something she didn't. The elevator went up to the top floor, where the main boardroom was located. Madison took a deep breath when the doors opened. She walked down the hall, pushed the double doors, and stopped immediately. The room was full of people, but they weren't investors. They weren't executives. They weren't lawyers with documents to sign. They were women. Dozens of women of all ages, of all appearances, of all stories. Women Madison had helped through the platform over the years. Entrepreneurs who found mentors. Single mothers who got investment for their businesses. Young women who discovered their dreams were valid. All there, gathered, looking at her with teary eyes and huge smiles. And in front of them all, holding a simple bouquet of wildflowers, was a lady with white hair and eyes Madison would recognize anywhere in the universe. Claire. Her mother. Madison felt the tears come before she could even process what was happening. Her mother lived in the countryside. She had difficulty traveling. She didn't like airplanes. How was she there? "My daughter," Claire said, with that soft voice Madison heard in her dreams. "I couldn't miss this moment for anything." Madison crossed the room and hugged her mother with a strength that came from years of longing, of battles fought alone, of nights when all she wanted was a lap to cry on. Claire held her firm, stroking her hair like she did when she was a child. "I'm so proud of you," her mother whispered. "So proud." Beatrice approached with red eyes. "Surprise! I brought her on the small jet yesterday. She almost had a heart attack, but she survived." "Beatrice, you're impossible," Madison said between tears and laughter. "I know. That's why you love me." The meeting that followed was completely different from what Madison had planned. Instead of a formal ceremony with lawyers and investors, it was a celebration. Each woman present had the chance to tell her story, to thank Madison for what the platform had done for her, to show Madison the real impact of the work she couldn't always see from the office. A young woman in her early 20s told how she had managed to open her first clothing store thanks to a mentor she found on the app. A mother of 3 explained how the investment she received through the platform saved her family from bankruptcy. A 60-year-old lady, who had started from scratch after a late divorce, showed photos of the restaurant that was now the most popular in her neighborhood. Each story was living proof that dreams matter, that starting over is possible, that no woman needs to accept when they say she isn't capable. When it was time to sign the New Start Foundation documents, Madison asked her mother to stand beside her. Claire held her daughter's hand as she signed each page, each clause, each commitment to help other women find the path she once found. "Your father would be so proud," Claire said softly. "He always knew you were going to do great things." Madison smiled, remembering Anthony, who had passed away a few years before, but whose love she still carried in her heart. "I know, Mom, I know." The afternoon turned into night without anyone noticing. When finally the last guests had left and the office was silent, Madison walked to the window and looked at the illuminated city below. She thought of Franklin, alone somewhere, reaping the bitter fruits he himself had sown. She didn't feel satisfaction in it. She didn't feel joy. She felt only a deep peace of knowing her life no longer depended on him. It never would again. She thought of Victoria, who was once her friend, and who chose a path of betrayal and falsehood. She silently hoped that one day she would find something true to fill the void she clearly carried inside. And she thought of herself, of the Madison from years ago, crying on Beatrice's couch, thinking life was over. If she could go back in time and talk to that woman, she would say only one thing: "Hold on tight. The best is yet to come." Claire approached and stood beside her daughter, looking at the same view. "What are you thinking about, my daughter?" Madison smiled. "I'm thinking that the best revenge isn't making the other person suffer. It's being so happy that their opinion doesn't matter anymore. That's very beautiful." "It's the truth, Mom, the purest truth." The two stood there in silence for a few minutes, just enjoying each other's presence. Then, Claire held her daughter's face between her wrinkled hands and looked into her eyes with all the love in the world. "Madison, you proved that no person has the power to define who you are. Only you can do that. And look what you chose to be." Madison hugged her mother one last time that night, and as she felt the warmth of that embrace, she understood she had truly won. Not because she had money, not because she had a jet, not because Franklin had been humiliated. She had won because she was at peace, because she had purpose, because she woke up every day knowing her life had meaning. And that, no man, no betrayal, no humiliation could ever take from her. Madison Young had learned the most valuable lesson there is. A person's true value isn't in what others think of them. It's in what they do with the scars life left behind.